So I think our record was like an 11 or 12-hour coffee date.
Welcome to the Unitarian Christian Alliance podcast, episode 33, My Trinitarian Best Friend, with Amanda Dunn. I am Mark Kane. If you are new here, a very quick summary. We are Scripture-believing Christians who understand that the Almighty God is a single person. He is the Creator, and Jesus is His Son, the exalted descendant of David, now at God's right hand. Two individuals. This podcast is for Unitarian Christians to encourage and connect us. If you wonder why we are emphasizing connections and relationships, you'll get a taste of it today. Also, check out episode 1, The Perilous Trinity Deep Dive, to understand that in more detail. Let's just say, for the most part, we Unitarian Christians, not Unitarian Universalists, we appreciate each other, and it helps us get through the day to know we're part of a broader community of outcasts. This podcast is not for Trinitarians, and if that's you, I'm glad you're here and taking the time to stop in. I've had folks share a few episodes with Trinitarians, and it turned out okay. And I've had some other feedback, like this review from T.N. Birder. This is probably my least favorite biblical Unitarian podcast. I certainly would never recommend this to a Trinitarian, and I probably wouldn't even share it with some biblical Unitarians. So, opinions vary. I have a unique approach, I suppose, and it's clearly not for everyone. But there are many who are thrilled and encouraged by this, who are now stepping outside of their comfortable boxes and doing new things. I love it. Today, Amanda reveals that she asked her Trinitarian friend to listen to this podcast. Yikes. Note, however, these are professional friends. Do not try this at home. So hang around to the end for some listener feedback and news of a particular video I've been dropping hints about.
Oh, wait. This may be exceptionally good news.
So, a Trinitarian who is a Unitarian's best friend? Is that even possible? Or is that just make-believe, like a mythological equestrian creature? Amanda, I appreciate that you're on the show. It's nice to have you here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here.
I know there's a very interesting story that happened recently. I'm excited to hear that. We have to get there. So what would be the short version of how you ended up where you are? Relatively short.
Well, I grew up a biblical Unitarian. My mom actually was raised Mormon, and my dad was raised Catholic.
Oh.
But they met at a home fellowship in Idaho Falls, run by the Way International.
Ah, okay.
They dated pretty briefly, got married, and started a family, and they were very, very involved in the Way International in the early years. I was born in 1982.
Okay.
When I was 3, they went WOW, which is kind of like a mission year, to Long Island.
All right.
We were there for a year, and then we came back. And I was little, but I'm pretty sure that it was shortly after that, like the mid-'80s, that my parents left the Way International. After that, they ran a home fellowship for most of my childhood and most of my adult life.
Oh.
So the vast majority of my experience in church was a very small group, usually between like 5 and 10 families.
Okay.
So then as I got into high school in the years after the Way, there was some brokenness there. And so they kind of dove back into the Bible after some time, trying to understand and make sense of some things. And I watched them study, and it inspired me to want to do that.
Oh.
So I was like a 15, 16-year-old kid who was really interested in concordances.
Was that on your list for Christmas?
I got a Bible for Christmas, engraved, and I was like, yes.
You want a concordance with your name printed on it. That's what you want.
I mean, yes, because then I'm official and
right.
also credentialed, right? As one of your earlier podcasts said. What are your credentials? Yes. So in high school and college, I kind of constantly sought fellowship with other people my own age because my parents' home fellowship, there were some really incredible believers, but there weren't people my age that were asking the questions and dealing with the things I was dealing with. So I was determined to find that fellowship, and I tried going to lots of different youth groups. In college, I went and tried several campus ministries. I would say I grew up pretty unaware until I was in high school that like our biblical Unitarian perspective was not accepted. I also grew up in a town in Idaho where the population is, at that time, was over 95% LDS, Mormon.
Wow.
So in terms of the churches that were left after you eliminate that, because we weren't Mormon, those churches had very, very strong feelings. I think there was kind of a culture of authoritarianism that I would say is prevalent in the Mormon church, in my experience with friends there, and that also was prevalent in the churches that I experienced here. And even in, I mean, I watched my parents kind of slowly come out of that too. So, like when I think back, I really feel like a lot of my early experience with church or faith community was very much defined by authoritarianism.
Oh, wow.
I didn't even know it didn't have to be like that.
Oh.
And that includes me. So I really think I always wasn't the easiest person to get along with when I went seeking fellowship, because a lot of the time I think I approached it like, oh, all these people are so great. And if I could just help them understand how wrong they are, we could all be in fellowship together and it would be wonderful.
So you're saying like you pictured yourself in that kind of come in and be the authority and explain it all? Like that was your role then?
Yeah. And I don't know if I really saw it that way, but I just thought that what I believed was so obvious and apparent that if they didn't believe this, then it's because no one had ever told them. I thought they're going to be so happy for me to tell them this.
Okay.
And that is literally never the reaction that I ever got.
Really? Oh.
No. So I had a hard time. You know, I honestly didn't fit in really anywhere in terms of church community.
Yeah.
And I will also say that looking back, given time, I've learned that the issue was less one doctrinal disagreement and much more the culture of authoritarianism. This idea that it's my way or the highway. Like the most painful experience I had was actually from a biblical Unitarian group.
Really?
It was an offshoot of the Way International. I went to their church camps in high school.
Okay.
And so many of these people I loved. I love them still. I wanted to move 4 hours away from my family to spend my senior year with this group of kids.
Okay.
And go to high school with them. But I was formally expelled over a totally different disagreement that I will say I was sometimes not very tactful, but this was not that. This was me making notes in my own book about a totally separate doctrine that I honestly had questions about. And I was told that is not allowed here.
Wow. So when you talk about authoritarianism, you're saying the my way or the highway mindset that means if you're going to be in this group, these are all the things that you will agree to, and you diverge from them, you're out.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
And that very often it becomes, well, these are the leaders of the church, and this is what they've said, and this is how it will be. But it doesn't always have to be that. You know, I think that when I was in high school, I think I probably did that in interactions with people that kind of insinuated, well, if you don't see it my way, then you don't really know God. You don't really believe him. And I don't remember ever saying that to someone, but I remember believing it. So I bet that they heard it.
Yeah. Yeah. We don't always say what our mouths say.
Right.
And we like, well, no, I didn't say that. And then later you realize that's entirely how they understood it.
Yes.
Yeah. What do they say? Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaketh. But I know that even somebody who controls their mouth and tries to very carefully say, I will not be rude to this person because I don't want them to think I don't like them. They'll know.
They'll know. They will know. And you know who will always know? The kids. They will always know. That is what I've learned. So yeah, that was my early experience. If I can just say one other thing about that.
Oh, yeah.
I think that my lack of fellowship. So there were many times in probably 3 different local churches where it's not like the Trinity came up and there was this big argument over it. It would get back to the youth group leader or the pastor that I had spoken to other members of the youth group about my beliefs. And then I would be quietly asked not to come back. And I have to tell you, it hurt.
Oh, gosh.
It hurt a lot because I know that some people are more independent and more introverted, maybe. I had a deep-seated need for fellowship, and I wanted it to be Christian fellowship.
Yeah.
But I think that after enough tries, the final straw was a campus ministry when I was in college. I decided I'm going to find fellowship somewhere else. And so I found fellowship with non-believers, with atheists, with people who completely rejected my beliefs, but who accepted me. They didn't care that we didn't agree. But there's a danger to that too, because my values shifted significantly in a matter of years. And I look back and I absolutely take responsibility. I don't know how to say that, I never stopped believing in God, but was Jesus Christ the Lord of my life at that time? I don't think I could say that with any integrity. But I know that a lot of that came from wounds I received from people who claimed to want to lead people toward Jesus. And so now I think I just never want to be someone who tells them that Jesus and his Father are not interested in them.
Yeah.
So anyway, so actually in the midst of that, I met my husband.
Okay.
You can edit this part out if you want, but one night, one New Year's Eve night, I met him in a bar. And 6 months later, I was 4 months pregnant and we were getting married. So we could not have done things more out of order. We could not have set ourselves up to fail any better than we did.
So this was during your phase in college where you had veered off the path.
Yeah, and this was after college.
Okay.
So at this point, I'd been out of college. I was working essentially for myself, contracted with a big financial firm. I was making great money. I owned my own house. According to the worldly things, I really was succeeding, but I was searching too. And not long before I met my husband, I reached out to a man who my parents had known in their time in the Way International.
Yeah.
And I just say this because there was a lot of hurt, but I also want to say that there were people from that ministry who, even decades later, who loved me and spoke into my life. And one of those men, he was the person who said, I don't think that you've met your king. I think that you need to spend some time getting to know who Jesus Christ is. And really encouraged me to think about that and to start thinking about what a transformed life actually looks like. That was about 6 months before I met my husband. Obviously, it didn't happen overnight.
It wasn't a quick transformation.
It wasn't. But I was not the person that was supposed to get pregnant and have no plan, and that wasn't going to happen to me according to what my life looked like from the outside. And the getting pregnant was the best thing that happened to me. I just made other bad decisions that put all of that in jeopardy. And the moment that happened, I realized how I had jeopardized the future of my child, the future with this man who I knew I loved, even though I didn't really know him very well. I was just sure I was going to love him.
Mm-hmm.
And so the weight of the consequences of my choices kind of came barreling down on me. My husband was in the military,
Okay.
and he was in special forces. His work schedule, his lifestyle, everything about what he could offer me did not bode well for a family, especially a marriage starting under pressure. I mean, to summarize it, he was always gone. We had literally no money. In fact, we owed a lot of people a lot of money. We had a child we weren't ready for, and we didn't actually know each other at all. When we got married, I think we had spent less than 3 weeks together total. So I kind of was hit with this realization that our odds of success were super low. And I started praying and asking for God's grace in the situation. And then I read a book by a man who probably wouldn't like me. His name's John Piper. He wrote a book called When I Don't Desire God. But it was very powerful for me because it helped me understand that I had never really believed that God wanted to give me what was best for me. I had always thought there's what God wants for me, and then there's what's really best for me, and that they were two different things.
Yeah.
And you know what I think happened is finally I hit this wall, and like humility swept over me, and this understanding that I am not who I thought I was. I have not lived up to the values I claim to believe in. I do not deserve the family that I have. And yet here I am with this man who is willing to do anything for me, and this God who just keeps showing up. And God told me that it would cost me everything. And it did, in terms of what I at least can understand. So very shortly after Zach and I got engaged, the company I worked with stopped operating in my area. My career was gone. My house was in jeopardy. I lost my house a year later to a short sale. My credit score tanked, which was a huge, devastating blow to my ego, if I'm honest. And I moved to San Diego and knew no one. So I'm 6 months pregnant. I'm married to a man I don't know. He will be deploying within 6 months, and we're going to have a baby in a few months. And I was all alone.
When you say humility overtook you, it sounds like it found you externally, but broke you internally.
Yes. I don't think I would ever have arrived there on my own, or it would have been when I was 85 years old, maybe. And so I'm so thankful. It was the most painful year of my life.
Wow.
But I realized we will not survive without the grace and mercy of God. Then I began to realize what that actually looks like, that it's not this removal of all of the consequence and the hard things, but it's how he just showed up and was with me and provided in these little ways to make the undoable, the impossible, possible. Not easy, but possible. And I think the big difference there is that for the first time, Jesus Christ really did become the Lord of my heart. I didn't want what he didn't want. I didn't want my own agenda. I just wanted to prepare my heart to look him in the eye on that first day of eternity and ask him to forgive me, because I knew my life could have been different. But yeah.
That was a big year for you.
It was.
So at this point in your life, you're now rebuilding your faith. You're starting a new family. Everything is different. And how did that progress then into where you are now?
Oh, well, the word is relationships. In that first year, there was a deployment and another move local, but I was still aching for fellowship. I was praying for God to send me a friend. And he did. He sent several people. Those are all different stories, but the way God works is incredible. Right at the beginning of my second year in San Diego, I met my friend Corey. And she is my favorite Trinitarian in the whole world. I love her so much. She was my neighbor. She and her husband watched what they thought was this little single mom move into the apartment across the parking lot from them. And Mike and Corey have the biggest hearts. And they thought, this girl seems to be alone. I actually asked my mom to please make sure she called me every day because I was afraid if something happened to me, no one would notice. They reached out to me and asked if, they could help me with anything, if I was new to the area. And somehow Corey and I decided to just walk together. So we just started walking a walking trail near our neighborhood and slowly started getting to know each other. She wasn't just a Christian. Like the second time we hung out, she grabbed my hand and she said, okay, I know this is going to sound really weird, but I have been praying for God to send me a friend that I can pray with. I don't want us to just talk about our problems. I want us to pray for each other. Are you that friend? And I said, yes, I am. That's me. Let's be those friends, even though I honestly didn't know how to do this. And so that friendship just started growing. I loved her so much and learned so much from her. She has this incredible ability to look at the world and not look past the brokenness and the pain and the struggle, not ignore it, and yet not let it overshadow the light and love of God. And I love that about her. I actually loved her so much that I decided not to tell her that I was a biblical Unitarian.
Interesting. Why jeopardize a good thing,
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
I didn't know how to say it because I knew that every time I had said it before, I had offended people. And I wanted to learn how to say it in a new way. So I think we were friends for 3 years before I told her.
Wow.
We actually had Mike and Corey over for dinner. And my husband, who at this time had become a biblical Unitarian.
Okay.
We had them over for dinner specifically to explain to them, kind of come clean about our position. I had been reading a book by, I think, James Dunn called Did the First Christians Worship Jesus? And I think he self-describes himself as a Trinitarian, but he gave me vocabulary that was so much more respectful and somehow focused on the common ground instead of the differences.
Okay.
I explained to her that night a biblical Unitarian perspective. And then I gave her an image and I said, when I think about who Jesus is in relation to God, I see myself absolutely kneeling before my King, Jesus Christ. And then I see him turning around and kneeling with me before the throne of God. And she listened.
Yeah.
She accepted that this was my belief. She disagreed.
Yeah.
But not angrily. And lots of theological discussion ensued.
I bet.
We were known to go to coffee and have to switch coffee shops multiple times throughout the day because the coffee shops would keep closing. So I think our record was an 11 or 12-hour coffee date.
Oh, my goodness.
But I also just want to say that this was the friend who we had those discussions and they mattered to us, But this is also the friend who my husband put down for the military to contact first if anything ever happened to him. She's the first phone call that we made when we lost people we loved, which happened a lot, actually.
Mm.
She was just there for us, and she loved us. And I feel like she taught me to love better.
I know there are people who could think, well, I can't be friends with so-and-so because they disagree with me theologically. And that's not the case. It might be bumpy and awkward, but you may also get really good at arguing theology. And
Absolutely.
11-hour coffee dates is plenty of practice.
It is. And it's life is bumpy and awkward. And we had plenty of other challenges to our friendship as well. In the time that Corey and I have been friends, we've gone through lots of different life changes that didn't always happen at the same time. I think sometimes we seek friends who affirm not only our beliefs, but where we are in life and what our needs are. And I can tell you that has never been true in our friendship, not for a day. For example, shortly after I met Corey, she and her husband started trying to start a family.
Okay.
And this is a couple who did everything right. They were obedient to God, and they were thoughtful in their planning of their marriage. And now we're 12 years later and they don't have any children. And in that time, me, who broke the very reasonable rules that God laid out, I have 4 beautiful boys. I just kept getting pregnant, and I actually didn't want to. And all she wanted in the world was to be pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow, the only answer to this for me is the work of God's Spirit in our lives. Somehow, our friendship hasn't just endured, it has sustained us.
So eventually, well, you've moved away, but you're still friends.
Yes.
So I mean, that's lurching forward probably, another decade?
It's a long time. So like the timeline in San Diego, from the time I met Corey, my husband deployed a total of 4 times. We had 3 biological children and then decided to foster. We fostered a little baby boy for the last several years that we were in San Diego and ended up adopting him.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that happened that was important is Corey convinced me to attempt to attend and be part of the community at a wonderful church in San Diego called Mission Trails Church. They're part of the Southern Baptist Convention.
Okay.
We don't just have the Trinity as a doctrinal difference. Like, there's plenty of doctrinal differences.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
But I went with her and was met with this totally alien to me, gentle, humble welcome. Everything from the pastor's teachings and the way that he spoke, maybe not his words always, but his demeanor, to the way that church members interacted with each other was so foreign to me because it was not authoritarian. It was not their way or no way. And that is not to say that they had this approach that all roads lead to God or truth is relative.
Yeah.
Not at all. These are people who passionately believe what they believe, but they're more passionate about loving each other and growing together.
Yeah.
So we were at that church for several years, and the short version of that story is that I got to witness what humble servant leadership looks like. I learned how to listen to someone's perspective and empathize with it, even if I disagree with it. And I learned that my perspective is not always the first thing someone needs to hear. It was really good. We were so comfortable. I was allowed to volunteer in the church, and I was allowed to be honest. Obviously we didn't take our doctrines and make them central parts of the discussion, but when it was pertinent, I could mention in our growth group, well, I have a different perspective here because, and our growth group was led by the leader of the church, and never once did he retort. I think he trusted that God really is working in each individual heart, and that these are people who can seek out the truth for themselves. He didn't feel like he had to constantly defend.
I feel that way too. I'm like,
yes.
People can hear things that they don't agree with and hear things that they do agree with. If they're seeking God, if they think God's wisdom is like a treasure that's worth selling, all you have and buying the land to dig it up, that God honors that, and he will take you to where you need to go. It may take a long time. You may not make it completely, The pastor, it sounds like that was his belief too, that he needs to just speak what he believes and listen and trust.
These people changed our lives. They helped us grow in our marriage, and they helped us grow as a family and in our faith. And I will say that while we attended, it's not that I ever doubted my biblical Unitarian faith, but I also decided that I had nothing to lose by sort of taking a no defense or a low defense approach. I didn't need to constantly be retorting in my mind or defending against every little disagreement. I prayed and I asked God to just show me his truth and help me read the Bible with open eyes and an open heart. And so I went through, I still want to stay open to learning more of God's truth always.
Mm-hmm.
But there was also this season in my life where I was very prepared if God wanted to show me that I had been wrong and that the Trinity was true. I didn't want to just believe what I'd always believed. Nothing came of that.
When you say nothing came of it, you mean you were more open to the ideas. In the end, you did not change your mind. That's what you mean.
Yes.
Yeah.
So then we spent a total of 10 years in San Diego, and my husband decided to leave the military for various reasons, and he felt led that we should move back to my hometown of Idaho Falls, Idaho. I was not enthusiastic about that. My family, my parents, my sisters, that part is incredible. And I was excited to be near my family. So thankful after all those years.
Yeah.
But the dark cloud that I felt still lingered, the loneliness that I had experienced here, I was afraid of it.
And Corey was not in Idaho.
No, and that was really difficult. And there's seasons to things, and what she and I both saw was that God had given us this friendship and worked in it.
Yeah.
But that we had grown, and it was time to take what we had learned and sow those things into new relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. It was a transition that seemed appropriate for where you were in life.
Yes. Now, that doesn't mean it wasn't heartbreaking, because leaving Corey was extremely difficult.
Yeah.
So we did, though. We came back to Idaho, and we had been praying with our growth group at Mission Trails Church for like a year for God to make provision for us to have community, for us to not be alone. And keep in mind, these are Trinitarians who are praying this with us. I love their heart.
Yeah.
I love them.
And they knew who you were.
They knew who I was. They loved us anyway. Anyway, we came back, and I had these fears that no churches are going to accept us. I was afraid of feeling spiritually alone and without community.
What you experienced in the church for the last several years had been a different style of church. And it sounds like you had very little confidence that you would find that kind of a fellowship when you got back to Idaho.
Exactly. And I'm not saying that that church isn't here. I'm just saying we haven't found it yet. But we have found a lot of really incredible people, including a family we absolutely adore who we found on the UCA website. And we're thankful for that. But what happened is basically my fears came true. We moved to Idaho in August of 2019. I knew I would be homeschooling my kids. So I reached out to a homeschool group. They're an international group. They're called Classical Conversations, and they meet once a week, usually in a church. And they are a Christian-based kind of co-op organization.
Okay.
I met with the campus leaders. There was 2 women, and I loved these women immediately. One of them is just becoming a treasured friend of mine. And so we joined this campus, very mainstream Christian ideologies, and they met at a church in town called Christ Community Church, which is a church I had actually had very little interaction with when I was growing up, and that had grown tremendously in the years I'd been gone. And so it was only natural. These girls went there. It was only natural for us to go and check out this church. And so we did. And we dove in. We joined a community group, and we got our kids in the youth programs and decided to sort of kind of slowly let this unfold and build relationships and ask for God to show us when and how to explain our beliefs. And we built some great friendships, incredible people. One of the associate pastors lives around the corner from us, and he has 5 boys and we have 4 boys.
Oh.
We hang out a lot. We love them.
Yeah.
And we went to their community group. That Christmas, they were out of town. And so another couple was leading the community group that night. And the man who, can I just emphasize that he's a nice guy. He's actually this gentle giant who would probably be mortified if he knew that he hurt me. He started off with, "Hey, has everybody heard the story about the time Saint Nick punched Arius, the heretic?"
Oh, no.
My husband was out of town, so I was there alone, and lots of people laughed. A couple of the women didn't laugh. I said, "Has anybody here ever been called a heretic before?" And the room went silent. And I said, "I have. And it in itself is a punch." And they all just stared. There was a mixture of, I think, fear and astonishment.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Did you have to explain things there, or did the conversation go back to his lesson?
They were so uncomfortable that after a minute, they just moved on. And I think they all just made mental note, beware the heretic in the room.
Did anybody talk to you later about that? Like
No. It had started something, and I knew that now we needed to be honest, because I knew that this would go back to our community group leaders. And so I called and asked to meet with them the next week. I met with them and explained my views, and also explained my intentions and my deep, deep desire for unity in spirit, even if we could not achieve unity in faith. And they were awesome. He asked me a lot of questions. And so then after a while he said, "So you're like a conservative Bible believing Christian?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "So you are not a Unitarian Universalist?" I said, "No, not at all." and he said, "So you're like a Unitarian unicorn." Yeah, I guess so. He told me, "You're the first person I've ever met that holds these beliefs.
Huh.
I've never heard of it." And he said, "Here's the thing. I think you're wrong, and I think it's a big deal, but I also have seen your family, and we've seen your faith, and we believe your faith is sincere. And so let's work through this." He also said, "Well, I need to speak to the lead pastor. I am going to share this with him." And I said, "Okay." Like 5-6 days later, it's Sunday. Zach's out of town, and I went to church with the kids, put them in the youth program. I'm sitting in the sermon. About 5 minutes into the sermon, the lead pastor takes a turn. He says, "The gospel of the Trinity is under attack." And he proceeded, I don't know if my perception is accurate, but he preached an entire sermon against me. It was mortifying. My cheeks were red hot. I could not wait to leave. I wanted to stand up and leave, but I thought, if I do that, they'll all know it's me.
Oh, yeah. Was it obvious that he was thinking about one person?
Yes, the way that he spoke.
Oh.
And I don't think I take things like real personally. And I didn't feel personally insulted. I just felt personally mortified. And I realized, okay, it's a matter of time until this happens to my children. And I don't want that to happen to my children. Because I know that pain.
Yeah.
I know what that feels like. So we stopped going. But we continued going to Classical Conversations homeschool group, which also met at that church. But they just use the church space.
Yeah. Okay.
A lot of those same families go. And you know what? I don't know who knew what. I just know that I love these women, and there's a couple dads. They are a community full of grace and kindness. And we're all just trying to homeschool our kids. So we're like in the trenches. And so we try to be good to each other, you know, it's hard. So then fast forward to this spring.
Is this the story?
Oh yeah, this is this.
Okay,
yes.
well then I'm going to stop you here.
Okay.
There's no way we're going to fit that in to this same conversation. I'm going to give you permission to not worry about trying to shove that part in.
Okay.
We will follow up with that story.
Okay.
And that'll give us plenty of time to enjoy the unique details that I'm sure the story will contain. But I am interested because of your connection to Corey. How many years now had you been in Idaho?
So it's 2 years this summer.
Okay.
We're just past 2 years.
Okay, so it's not been a terribly long time. I'm curious if when you had these experiences like the pastor, did you pick up the phone and talk to Corey about that?
Oh, she's the first person I called.
That would have been an interesting conversation because how did that, I mean, what I find so fascinating is like you had a difficult moment with a Trinitarian pastor and you pick up the phone to unburden yourself with your Trinitarian friend.
Corey's first response is, "Oh my gosh, this had to hurt. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that this hurt you." Her second response was to ask, "Where do I listen to this sermon?" Her opinion was, "Look, I believe in the Trinity too, but what I heard in his sermon was arrogance, not the gospel."
When I talked to you last time, just to get to know you briefly, you had just said goodbye to Corey, who had come up to visit you that same day.
Yeah, we see each other often. We talk about things. Sometimes it is awkward. Sometimes it is hard. You know, telling her, "Guess what? I'm becoming more involved with this biblical Unitarian community. And I might be on a podcast." And, someone else reached out to me about maybe helping to author some biblical Unitarian Christian children's curriculum. I don't expect her to endorse my belief, but she can still be happy. She can rejoice with me when I'm rejoicing, and she can mourn with me when I'm mourning. There's this idea that I grew up with that was pervasive here. I think, I've used the term authoritarianism. Another way I think I could say it is this terrible misunderstanding of what it means to be strong in your faith. I think there's like a local obsession with that here. And there's this idea that being strong in your faith is being rigid and using the Bible like a hammer against anyone who disagrees with you. But I don't think that rigidity and strength are the same thing. I think that truth is rigid, but I think that love is very flexible. And that we are called to walk in truth and grace. It's hard for me every day, but I've learned to ask myself, what can I say if I'm going to say anything that is honoring of God's truth and loving of the person in front of me? And if it can't be both, I'm not sure it's really true.
Yeah, like I don't even want to talk. I just want you to say your words.
Stop.
Yeah, if you're about to open your mouth and you can sense that it's lacking either of those qualities, maybe it's best to just wait and try again another time. Because like being angry with somebody can take half of that equation, lop it right off, and leave you with just, you're going to hear the truth now, and you probably won't even like it, but I'll feel good telling you.
Yes. And that's just the thing, Mark, is I think that I am someone whose heart was specifically susceptible to that very good feeling of being right. And I don't want to be right in a way that hurts other people. And that doesn't mean that I'm not honest about truth, that I don't pursue truth, that I don't seek to live out God's truth in my life. That does not mean any of those things. But I think it's more of like a calling in than a calling out.
How so?
Like, I can disagree with someone in a way that is derogatory to their value, like their intelligence or their qualifications. Or I can disagree with someone in a way that specifically recognizes their value and the value of their perspective, but still dissents from it, that still offers another way. I don't know. I think that in California, I was this kind of too conservative, I'm not even talking about politically, I'm just talking about like in life, too conservative, prudish girl. And now like in Idaho, I'm like a dangerous California hippie for my open ways. And so
you're just an oddball all around now.
I don't find that I get to fit in very often. And maybe that's why I treasure so much the friends who have decided to say to me, you belong here.
So your friend Corey knows what's happening, that you're going to be on this podcast.
She does. Yes. She has been listening.
Oh.
Really intriguing. And she said, I have a bunch of questions, but you know me, I want to do my research first. I want to look.
Okay.
I love her. I love her heart. I love that she's like, oh, you're hurting, friend, and this has been hard. I'm going to dig in. I want to understand. And so I had told her about Anna, especially, and how much I loved her story and her podcast. Both Corey more than me, both of us, we have a passion for being involved in ministry in one way or another. Corey is very much a teacher. So it was really exciting for Corey to hear. That's cool.
That's cool.
Isn't that intriguing?
Oh my gosh.
I know.
Well, I'm going to have to put something at the end of this podcast and be like, hey, Corey.
Oh, she's going to be listening to this for sure. She would laugh. She has a great sarcastic sense of humor, which does help. Because I was like, so does Mark, just FYI.
Yeah.
She said, sometimes like when he's like, we're not demon possessed. She's like, I cringe a little. And I was like, well, I get it, but it's really what people say.
Yeah.
She's like, wow.
I have had some people say, well, Mark, your podcast isn't cringy. I was like, well, okay, she was cringing. So
she cringed a little. But like she's coming from a very outside perspective. And you know what? Like, and I think she saw this. I didn't say this to her. I attended a Trinitarian church with her for years, and there were cringy things every single service I attended. But
fair.
You know, I decided if I can see past this, God can work. And he did.
Yeah.
I want to say that certainly like the way that Corey and I have always approached our theology together, like our discussions, is that we don't approach it like, I'm going to convince you, I'm going to sway you. You know, so I didn't say, I really want to convince you to be a Unitarian. You should listen to this.
Yeah.
I said it would really mean a lot. There are perspectives here that I've never been able to share with you about what it feels like to be a biblical Unitarian in a Trinitarian world.
Yes.
And she said, I want to understand. So that's why she listened. So it means a lot to me because not a lot of people are willing to do that.
No, that's a good friendship. So next time, let's just enjoy the story, your homeschooling story.
Yeah.
Amanda, thank you very much for your willingness to share. I know there will be so many people blessed by this.
Oh, thank you, Mark. What you're doing is incredible. I went from feeling pretty alone a couple months ago to feeling like a part of a really incredible community. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Justin from Florida writes, Hi, Mark. I love your podcast. I'm so happy to see more people with this kind of faith because it can be a lonely walk at times. You guys are doing great things. I hope to be at the UCA conference, but if not, I hope it goes well. May the Father bless your work. Thanks, Justin. It's great to hear from you, and if you can make it to the conference, it'll be great to see you too. The first UCA conference is October 15th through 17th, just north of Nashville. There are still spaces available. Find out more on our website, UnitarianChristianAlliance.org. Click on Conference in the menu. Oh, while you're there, click on the membership map. It's like the earth has come down with a severely lovely case of orange chickenpox. PJ from Tennessee wrote about episode 32, Negotiating with Trinitarians. Hey, Mark, I particularly enjoyed this episode. The appreciation comes in being reminded to keep a calm and receptive ear to others. I found even today, in passing conversation with a person, that my assumption of what they believed was totally inaccurate. Hearing them helped open more dialogue and an invitation to argue theology later. Friendly. Thank you again for continuing on this calling. It's blessing us big time. Thanks, PJ. It was a fun episode. I had mentioned John Lawson's adept and ample use of analogies in the email I sent to the UCA podcast subscription list. Stephanie Schlegel, my guest from episode 12, An American and Messianic Israel, she took notice and enumerated the analogies. She wrote, Excellent interview. I like all of John's analogies. The Truman Show, whiteboard, car repairs, birth, definitely raw, remodeling, switching from a lifetime of sugary food to meat and potatoes, stage cage, healing, hostage, and voices. Then later, after she had counted those 10, she followed up. Mark, I missed the theme park analogy. That's 11. We listened to it again as we traveled with our kids. Thanks, Stephanie. 11 analogies in 30 minutes of interview. That's one analogy every 163 seconds. Impressive work, Mr. Lawson. You can email me your thoughts, podcast@UnitarianChristianAlliance.org. You can also record yourself and email it to the same address, or click the record link in the notes or on the podcast website. I love getting audio. Then you get to hear yourself, and you can tell your grandmother that you're on the internets. So now, that announcement. If you've been paying close attention, you've heard casual reference to some video I was working on. Well, it's happened. After some very tense negotiations with top-tier Hollywood actors' agents, we opted to stick with a slightly less expensive video production using puppets.
Oh, yeah.
And the handiwork of my mom, Sharon.
Now you're talking sense.
Together, she and I have produced a highly professional puppet reenactment of the audio skit God's Death from episode 19, which itself was a counterfactual historical reconstruction of the night of Jesus' death. Thanks, Mom, for being one of the hands and for running the camera for all those close-up shots. The puppet show can be found on the Unitarian Christian Alliance YouTube channel. It's called God's Death. Naturally, there's a link in the show notes, too. But why just have a puppet show? Do you love a good skit enough to think about it? Yes, you can now appreciate it from both the goofy, eye-rolling humor side and using your brain on the Trinities podcast. Dale Tuggy in this week's episode 333, The Arguments of God's Death, does what Dale does. You can imagine my delight when he informed me that something in that skit was sophisticated. Amanda, I am excited to hear your homeschooling experience. Thanks for giving up some more of your time. Oh, and thanks, Corey. I'm honored that you are joining us. I'd love to meet you one day. May we all be blessed to have friends like you. May God bless you in your truth pursuits. I hope this podcast serves you well.